In the grand Hallowell Manor, a single candle flickers in the dead of night, marking the mysterious death of Reginald Poole, the devoted butler. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets. A hidden letter, charred papers in the garden, a suspicious vial, and a nephew's desperate greed. As the autumn soirée sparkles, shadows of betrayal loom. Will Miss Marple's keen insight expose a murderer before the candle's truth burns out? Chapter 1. The Flickering Light. The autumn sun hung low over Ashford Green, casting a golden glow across the ivy-clad walls of Hallowell Manor. The estate, with its mullioned windows and sprawling lawns, stood as a testament to centuries of Hallowell lineage, its grandeur soft by the gentle decay of time. Within its walls, Miss Jane Marple, a guest of her old friend Lady Beatrice Hallowell, sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles moving with the quiet rhythm of habit. Her eyes, sharp behind their mild expression, missed nothing, not the faint tremor in the housemaid's hands as she set down a tray, nor the way the footman's gaze lingered on the closed library door. Miss Marple had arrived 2 days prior, invited for the annual autumn soirée, a tradition Lady Beatrice upheld with the fervor of one clinging to the past. The manor was alive with preparations. Silver was polished, chandeliers gleamed, and the scent of chrysanthemums wafted through the halls. Yet beneath the bustle, a shadow had fallen. That morning, Reginald Poole, the butler, had been found dead in the library, slumped over a mahogany table. A single candle burned to a waxy stub beside him. The local doctor, a nervous man named Mortimer, had declared it a heart attack. Unsurprising, he said, for a man of Poole's age and fastidious nature. But Miss Marple, sipping her tea as Lady Beatrice recounted the news, felt a familiar prickle of doubt. Reginald was a fixture here, Lady Beatrice said, her voice brisk as she adjusted her pearl brooch. He served my late husband for 30 years, and me for 10 more. Always so precise, clocks set to the second, linens folded just so. A heart attack is sad, but not unexpected. The soirée will go on, Jane. It must. Her tone was resolute, but her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin, betraying a flicker of unease. Miss Marple nodded, her face serene. Of course, Beatrice. A great loss, I'm sure. She paused, her needles pausing mid-stitch. Though it's curious, isn't it? A candle in the library, when the manor has such fine electric lights. Lady Beatrice blinked, as if the thought hadn't occurred to her. Oh, Reginald was old-fashioned. He liked candles for ambience, or so he said. Silly habit, but harmless. Harmless, Miss Marple echoed softly, her mind already turning. In her experience, habits were rarely as simple as they seemed, and Poole's death struck her as oddly staged. Why had he been in the library at all, when his duties typically kept him in the pantry or the dining hall? And why a candle, when the flick of a switch would have sufficed? She recalled the housemaid Clara's fleeting glance toward the library door, a look that held more than sorrow-fear, perhaps, or guilt. As Lady Beatrice rose to oversee the florist, Miss Marple remained in the drawing-room, her knitting a pretext for observation. The footman, a young man named Thomas, passed by, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. "Thomas," she called gently, "might you fetch me a fresh ball of wool from my room? The blue one on the dresser." He nodded, eager to please, but his eyes darted again to the library. Miss Marple filed the gesture away. The household was on edge, and not merely from grief. There was something unspoken, a thread waiting to be unraveled. Later, as she strolled the manor's oak-paneled corridors, Miss Marple paused outside the library. The door was ajar, revealing a room of heavy drapes and leather-bound books. She stepped inside, her sensible shoes soft on the Persian rug. The table where Poole had been found was pristine, save for a faint ring of wax where the candle had stood. She bent closer, her eyes narrowing. The wax was uneven, as if the candle had been moved after burning. Odd, she thought, for a man as precise as Poole to leave such a mark. A rustle at the door startled her. It was Clara, the housemaid, clutching a duster. "Oh, miss." "I didn't mean to disturb," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. "Just tidying up. No disturbance at all," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Poor Mr. Poole. It must have been a shock, finding him here." Clara's hands twisted the duster. "It was, miss. Ever so sudden. He was always so proper. Never thought he'd go like that, alone with just a candle for company." "Indeed," Miss Marple said. "Did he often work by candlelight?" Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering to the table. "Not often, miss. Only sometimes, late at night. Said it helped him think. But last night?" She trailed off, biting her lip. "Last night?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone as soft as a summer breeze. Clara glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer. "He was different, miss. Nervous-like. I saw him coming out of the library near midnight, looking pale as a ghost. Said he'd found something that wasn't right. Didn't say what, but he was clutching a bit of paper." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained placid. "A bit of paper? How curious. And did you see him again after that?" Clara shook her head. "No, miss. Next I knew, he was gone." Her voice cracked, and she hurried away, duster forgotten. Miss Marple stood alone in the library, her mind weaving patterns. A nervous butler, a mysterious paper, a candle that didn't belong. She thought of the village gossips back home, how they'd spin a tale from less. But here, in the quiet of Hallowell Manor, the truth felt closer and more dangerous. As she left the library, the chandelier above flickered, casting shadows that danced like secrets across the walls. Chapter 2. The Servants' Gossip. The morning after Reginald Poole's untimely death, Hallowell Manor hummed with a subdued energy, as if the very walls held their breath. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unobtrusive guest, sat in a high-backed chair near the drawing-room's bay window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied the keen attention she paid to the household's pulse. The autumn light filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from the serene view of Ashford Green's rolling hills. The butler's death, with its curious candle and Clara's whispered hint of a mysterious paper, had set her mind alight with possibilities. She knew that in a house like Hallowell Manor, secrets were often buried in the chatter of those who served its masters. With Lady Beatrice occupied by a florist delivering chrysanthemums for the impending soirée, Miss Marple seized the opportunity to venture below stairs. She moved with the quiet grace of one accustomed to going unnoticed, her sensible shoes making no sound on the stone steps leading to the servants' quarters. Her ostensible purpose was to admire the manor's collection of antique silver, a topic sure to flatter the staff's pride in their work. The butler's pantry, a narrow room lined with gleaming trays and candelabras, was her destination, and there she found Clara, the housemaid, polishing a silver teapot with a vigor that suggested more than mere duty. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice as warm as a village hearth. "What a splendid collection. You must take great pride in keeping it so fine." Clara looked up, her young face flushed from effort or nerves. "Oh, miss, it's a job and a half, but Mr. Poole always insisted on perfection." Her hand slowed, and her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting an interruption. Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a stool, as if she had all the time in the world. "Mr. Poole sounds like a remarkable man. So particular, I hear. Did he have many such habits?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, catching the slight tremble in Clara's fingers. Clara hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He did, miss. Ever so particular about his duties. Always checking the accounts, locking the silver away himself, lighting that candle in the library when he worked late. Said it helped him think, though the electric lights are plenty bright. But last night—" She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Last night?" Miss Marple prompted, her needles pausing mid-stitch, as if the question were merely polite curiosity. Clara glanced at the door again, and spoke in a rush. "He was frightened, miss. I saw him coming out of the library near midnight, his face pale as milk. He was clutching a letter, or so it looked, and muttering to himself. Said he'd found something improper, and it wasn't his place to speak of it, but it weighed on him. I asked if he was all right, but he just shook his head and told me to mind my work." Miss Marple's expression remained placid, but her mind raced. A letter improper, and a frightened butler details that wove a pattern as intricate as her knitting. "How very distressing," she said softly. "Did he say anything else about this letter? Or to whom it was addressed?" Clara shook her head, her hands resuming their polishing with renewed vigor. "No, miss. He was tight-lipped, always was. But I heard him arguing earlier that day with Mr. Julian, Lady Beatrice's nephew. They were in the study, voices raised something fierce. I couldn't catch much, but Mr. Poole said something about responsibility and the family's honor. Mr. Julian stormed out, red in the face. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to Julian Hallowell, the charming but profligate nephew who seemed to live beyond his means. She had met him briefly upon her arrival, a handsome young man with a quick smile and eyes that lingered too long on Lady Beatrice's silver. An argument, she mused. How unfortunate. Was Mr. Julian often at odds with Mr. Poole? "Not often, miss," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Mr. Julian's been coming round more lately, always asking her ladyship for money. Mr. Poole didn't approve, said it wasn't proper for a gentleman to lean so heavy on family. I think he saw something in the accounts that set him off." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the weight of Clara's words. Accounts, arguments, and a letter each a thread in the tapestry of Poole's final hours. She thanked Clara and rose, her mind already mapping her next steps. The servants' quarters, with their low ceilings and lingering scent of polish, held more voices, and Miss Marple knew the cook, Mrs. Baxter, would be her next confidant. She found Mrs. Baxter in the kitchen, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a no-nonsense air, kneading dough for the soiree's pastries. The kitchen was warm, redolent with the scent of baking bread, and Miss Marple complimented the aroma with genuine appreciation. "Mrs. Baxter, your kitchen is a marvel," she said, settling near the work-table. "I imagine you've seen many a day in this house. Mr. Poole's passing must be quite a blow." Mrs. Baxter's hands paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing Miss Marple's intent. "Aye, miss, it's a shock. Reginald was a stickler, but he kept this place running like a clock. Never thought he'd go so sudden." She resumed her kneading, her movements forceful. "Mind, he'd been out of sorts lately. Kept to himself more than usual." "Out of sorts?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, inviting confidence. "Had something troubled him?" Mrs. Baxter snorted, dusting flour from her apron. "Troubled, aye. He was fussing over the household books, said things didn't add up. Last week I caught him in the garden, of all places, poking about near the rose bushes. Said he'd seen Mr. Julian burning papers there the day before. Thought it peculiar, him being so careful with records." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Burned papers, a frightened butler, and an argument with Julian, the pieces were falling into place, though the picture remained incomplete. "Burning papers?" she said thoughtfully. "How curious. Did Mr. Poole say what they might have been?" "No, miss, but he was proper vexed. Said it wasn't right. A gentleman destroying what ought to be kept. I told him to leave it be Mr. Julian's family. After all but Reginald was stubborn. Said duty came before all." Mrs. Baxter's voice softened, a rare crack in her gruff demeanor. "I reckon it wore him out, fretting so." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. The garden, the rose bushes, the burned papers each, a clue to Poole's final hours. She thanked Mrs. Baxter and made her way back upstairs, her steps slow but purposeful. The manor's grandeur seemed to close in around her, its polished surfaces hiding truths as surely as the servants' gossip revealed them. As she passed the library, Miss Marple paused, her eyes lingering on the closed door. The candle, the letter, the argument all pointed to something more than a weak heart. She thought of her own village, where whispers in the grocer's shop or the vicarage tea often unraveled the most tangled mysteries. Here, in Hallowell Manor, the servants' gossip was her guide, and she would follow its trail to the truth. The soirée loomed, a stage for secrets to unfold, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and watchful eyes, would be ready. Chapter 3. The Soirée's Shadows. The evening of Lady Beatrice Hallowell's autumn soirée bathed Hallowell Manor in a glow of candlelight and crystal, the chandeliers casting prisms across the ballroom's polished floor. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and the murmur of Ashford Green's gentry, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a corner near a potted fern, her lace shawl draped modestly over her shoulders, appeared as unremarkable as ever. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, a prop to justify her quiet observation, but her eyes, bright and unyielding, darted from guest to guest, catching the subtle currents beneath the evening's gaiety. The manor's grandeur was on full display, yet the shadow of Reginald Poole's death lingered, unspoken but palpable. Miss Marple noted the way the footman, Thomas, moved with a stiffness that suggested more than fatigue, and how Clara, serving canapes, avoided the library door as if it were a spectre. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in emerald silk, played the gracious hostess, but her smiles were fleeting, her gaze occasionally drifting to the staircase leading to the private quarters. Miss Marple's mind, ever attuned to such nuances, catalogued these details with the precision of a ledger. Her attention settled on Julian Hallowell, Lady Beatrice's nephew, who cut a dashing figure in his tailored evening suit. His charm was effortless, his laughter loud as he entertained a cluster of young ladies. But Miss Marple saw the strain in his eyes, the way his hand tightened around his glass when he thought no one watched. He steered clear of the library, circling the ballroom's edges as if drawn by an invisible tether. Clara's words echoed in Miss Marple's memory. An argument, a letter, and Julian's flushed anger. Had Poole's discovery threatened the young man's position? Across the room, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, a widow of considerable means, held court near the fireplace. Her diamond brooch sparkled, a beacon of wealth, but her sharp eyes scanned the crowd with a wariness that belied her confident posture. Miss Marple recalled village whispers of Lavinia's fondness for Julian, her generosity rumored to extend beyond mere affection. Had Poole, with his meticulous accounts, uncovered something that linked them? Lavinia's gaze met Julian's briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between them before she turned away, her smile tight. Then there was Dr. Mortimer, the local physician, whose nervous energy stood out amid the soiree's polish. He hovered near the refreshment table, his fingers fidgeting with a napkin as he spoke to a guest. Miss Marple had not forgotten his hasty verdict of Poole's death. A heart attack, he'd said, with an assurance that seemed practiced. His presence at the manor the night before Poole's death, delivering a tonic, gnawed at her. Was it mere coincidence, or something more deliberate? As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Miss Marple rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and made her way toward the library. The ballroom's noise faded as she slipped into the corridor, the heavy oak door looming ahead. She entered the library, its silence a stark contrast to the revelry outside. The room was dim, the electric lights untouched, and the table where Poole had been found was bare, the wax ring she'd noticed earlier meticulously cleaned. She frowned, her fingers brushing the table's edge. The candle stub was gone, removed by someone with a purpose beyond tidying. Why preserve the candlestick but not its remnant? It was a small thing, but in Miss Marple's experience, Small things often held the greatest weight. She examined the candlestick, its silver base gleaming under her touch. It was heavy, ornate, but unremarkable, yet something about its placement felt wrong, as if it had been shifted to conceal a flaw. She turned it over, her fingers probing, but found nothing. Still, the absence of the stub nagged at her, a detail out of place in a house where Poole's precision had reigned. A soft creak startled her, and she turned to see Thomas, the footman, at the door, his face pale. "Beg pardon, miss," he stammered, clutching a tray. "I didn't know anyone was here." "Just checking the lamps." "Of course, Thomas," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Such a sad place now, with poor Mr. Poole gone." "Did he often come here at night?" Thomas shifted, his eyes avoiding hers. "Sometimes, miss. He liked to work late, going over the books." Said the quiet helped him think. He hesitated, and added, "He was here the night before. You know, looked worried. He did." "Worried?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, encouraging. "How so?" Thomas glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "He was pacing, miss, muttering about something he'd found. Didn't say what, but he kept looking at the desk, like it held something important. I offered to fetch him tea, but he sent me off sharpish." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving Thomas's words into the pattern. The desk, the letter, the candle, all pieces of a puzzle yet to be solved. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, and he hurried away, his tray rattling. Returning to the ballroom, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her eyes now fixed on Julian, who was laughing too loudly at a guest's jest. She thought of the village postmistress back home, whose sharp ears caught every whispered scandal. Here, the manor's walls held their own secrets, and Julian's unease was a thread she would follow. Had he argued with Poole over the letter Clara mentioned? And what of Lavinia Gray's wary glances, or Dr. Mortimer's fidgeting hands? The soirée, with its glittering facade, was a stage for hidden truths, and Miss Marple, with her quiet watchfulness, was its keenest observer. As the evening drew to a close, Lady Beatrice approached, her face flushed from hosting. "Jane, you've been so quiet," she said, her tone teasing but strained. "I hope you're enjoying yourself." "Oh, immensely," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. "It's a lovely evening, Beatrice. So many interesting people." Her eyes twinkled, and Lady Beatrice, unaware of the depths they plumbed, moved on to her next guest. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched, her mind alive with questions. The library, with its missing candle and whispered secrets, beckoned. She would return there, she decided, when the manor slept and its shadows could speak. For now she watched, her gentle presence a mask for the relentless curiosity that had unraveled many a mystery before. Chapter 4. The Hidden Letter. The morning after the soirée, Hollowell Manor awoke to a crisp autumn dawn, the mist clinging to the lawns like a shroud. Miss Jane Marple sat at the breakfast table, her hands folded neatly around a cup of tea, her eyes as alert as ever, despite the late hour of the previous night's festivities. Lady Beatrice, opposite her, was in high spirits, recounting the success of the evening with a vigor that belied the shadow of Reginald Poole's death. "The guests were charmed, Jane," she said, buttering a scone. "Even with poor Reginald's passing, we carried on. He would have approved, don't you think?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression as soft as the morning light filtering through the dining-room's tall windows. "Indeed, Beatrice, Mr. Poole was devoted to the manor's reputation. I imagine he took great care with its affairs accounts and such, perhaps?" Lady Beatrice paused, her knife hovering. "Oh, yes, Reginald was meticulous. Kept a ledger of every penny spent, from coal to candlesticks. It's likely in his room, with his other things." Her tone was casual, but her eyes flickered with something Miss Marple could not quite place concern, perhaps, or unease. "His room," Miss Marple mused, sipping her tea. "It might be comforting to see how he organized things." A butler's habits tell so much about a house. Her voice was gentle, but her mind was sharp, recalling Clara's mention of a letter and Mrs. Baxter's tale of burned papers. If Poole had uncovered something amiss, his quarters might hold the key. Lady Beatrice, ever obliging, granted permission for Miss Marple to look through Poole's belongings, assuming it a harmless whim of her old friend. "Just don't tire yourself, Jane," she said, rising to consult with the housekeeper about the day's menu. Left to her own devices, Miss Marple made her way to the servants' wing, her steps measured but purposeful. Poole's room was a study in austerity, a narrow space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk by a window overlooking the kitchen garden. The air held the faint scent of polish and starched linen, a testament to the butler's fastidious nature. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, noting the neatly folded clothes, the polished shoes aligned with military precision, and the desk's sparse contents, an inkpot, a pen, and a blotter. She lifted the blotter, her fingers delicate but deliberate, and found what she sought: a letter, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. The envelope was addressed to Lady Beatrice in Poole's precise hand, but it was unsealed, never delivered. Miss Marple hesitated only a moment before opening it, her sense of propriety outweighed by the need for truth. The letter was brief but damning. "My dear Lady Beatrice, it is with great reluctance that I write, for it is not my place to question the family's affairs. Yet duty compels me to report irregularities in the household accounts. Funds have been withdrawn, small sums at first, but growing bolder, totaling near £500 over 6 months. I have reason to suspect Mr. Julian's involvement, though I lack proof beyond the ledgers. I await your guidance, for the honor of Hallowell Manor is at stake. Yours faithfully, Reginald Poole." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind weaving the letter into the tapestry of clues. £500 was no trifling sum, and Julian's frequent visits, coupled with his rumored debts, painted a troubling picture. Had Poole confronted him, as Clara suggested? And had that confrontation led to the butler's death? She tucked the letter into her handbag, its weight a quiet burden, and continued her search. The ledger Lady Beatrice mentioned was absent, perhaps taken or misplaced, but its absence spoke as loudly as its contents might have. Returning downstairs, Miss Marple sought out the kitchen, where Mrs. Baxter was rolling pastry for luncheon. The cook's broad face was flushed from the heat of the oven, but her eyes were sharp as she greeted Miss Marple. "Back again, miss?" "You've a nose for my baking," she said, a hint of warmth in her gruff tone. Miss Marple smiled, settling near the work-table. "Your kitchen is a haven, Mrs. Baxter. I was just thinking of Mr. Poole, such a careful man. Did he ever mention trouble with the accounts?" Mrs. Baxter's hands stilled, her knuckles whitening against the rolling pin. "He did, miss, now you mention it. Fussed over those books like they were scripture. Last week he was in a right state, said he'd found discrepancies, his word. Didn't say more, but I saw him in the garden after, near the rose bushes, poking about like he'd lost something." "The rose bushes," Miss Marple echoed, her voice soft. "You mentioned he saw Mr. Julian burning papers there. Did he say what they might be?" Mrs. Baxter shook her head, dusting flour from her hands. "Not a word, but he was cross about it. Said it wasn't proper, destroying records. I told him to let it be Mr. Julian's family. After all, but Reginald was like a dog with a bone. Said he'd do his duty, come what may." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. The burned papers, the missing ledger, the letter all pointed to Julian's desperation to conceal his actions. But was it merely theft, or something darker? She thanked Mrs. Baxter and stepped into the garden, the autumn air cool against her cheeks. The rose bushes stood in a tidy row, their blooms fading with the season. Near one, the earth was disturbed, a patch of soil looser than the rest. Borrowing a trowel from a nearby shed, Miss Marple knelt, her movements careful to avoid attention. She dug gently, unearthing a charred scrap of paper, its edges crumbling but a few words legible. Must repay, urgent, consequences. The fragment was small, but its implications were vast. Julian, it seemed, was entangled in debts he could not escape, and Poole's discovery had threatened to expose him. Miss Marple slipped the paper into her handbag alongside the letter, her mind turning to the soiree's shadows, Julian's forced laughter, Lavinia Gray's wary glances, Dr. Mortimer's nervous hands. The Manor's secrets were unraveling, thread by thread, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, would follow them to their source. As she returned to the house, the wind stirred the leaves, whispering of truths yet to be uncovered. Chapter 5. The Garden's Secrets. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Hallowell Manor's gardens, where the last of the roses clung stubbornly to their stems. Miss Jane Marple, her sensible hat shielding her eyes, walked with measured steps along the gravel path, her mind as active as the bees humming among the flower beds. The charred scrap of paper she had unearthed near the rose bushes lay safely in her handbag, its words, must repay, urgent, consequences, a silent accusation against Julian Hallowell. The letter from Poole, tucked alongside it, confirmed her suspicions of financial misconduct, but the butler's death suggested a motive far darker than mere theft. Miss Marple's village instincts, honed by years of observing human frailties, told her that the garden held more than blooms. It held the key to unraveling the truth. She paused by the rose bushes, their thorny branches swaying in the breeze. The disturbed patch of earth where she had found the paper was subtle, easily overlooked by a less discerning eye. Kneeling carefully, her gloved hands brushed the soil, searching for further clues. The ground yielded nothing more, but the act of burning papers in such a secluded spot spoke of desperation. Julian, she mused, was a man accustomed to charm, not labor. Why risk the gardener's notice unless the papers were too dangerous to keep? Miss Marple rose, dusting her hands, and turned her gaze to the Manor's windows, where curtains twitched as if someone watched. The household was on edge, its rhythms disrupted by Poole's death and the whispers that followed. She recalled Mrs. Baxter's account of the butler's agitation, his insistence on duty despite the risk. Had he confronted Julian, as Clara's story of their argument suggested? And if so, had that confrontation pushed the young man to an act he could not undo? Her thoughts were interrupted by the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. It was Thomas, the footman, carrying a rake and looking ill at ease. "Oh, miss," he said, startled, his eyes darting to the rose bushes. "Didn't expect to see you here. Just tidying the paths before the leaves pile up." "A lovely garden," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "You must spend much time here, Thomas. Did Mr. Poole ever come this way, perhaps to clear his head?" Thomas gripped the rake tighter, his knuckles pale. "Not often, miss. He was always indoors, fussing over the silver or the books. But I saw him here last week, near where you're standing. Looked like he was searching for something, muttering to himself. I asked if he needed help, but he waved me off, sharp-like." "Searching," Miss Marple echoed, her voice soft as the wind. "How curious. Did he find anything, do you think?" Thomas hesitated, his gaze flickering to the Manor. "Can't say, miss, but he was in a state worse than usual. And Mr. Julian was out here the day before, burning something. I saw the smoke, smelled it too paper, not leaves. Mr. Poole didn't like it, said it wasn't proper." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving Thomas's words into the pattern. The burned papers, the butler search, the argument with Julian, all threads leading to a single knot. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, and he hurried off, his rake dragging in the gravel. Determined to test her theory, Miss Marple sought out Julian himself. She found him in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. He was lounging in a wicker chair, a cigarette in hand, his handsome face clouded with a tension that no amount of nonchalance could mask. "Miss Marple," he said, rising with a forced smile, Escaping the manor's bustle? It's quite a circus, isn't it? Indeed, she replied, settling opposite him, her hands folded neatly. A lovely spot, this conservatory. Though I imagine you prefer the garden, Mr. Hallowell. The rose bushes are charming this time of year. Julian's smile faltered, his cigarette pausing mid-air. The garden? I suppose it's pleasant enough. Why do you ask? Miss Marple's eyes were gentle but unyielding. I heard you were there recently, perhaps burning some papers. Mr. Poole seemed troubled by it, or so the servants say. His face hardened, a flush creeping up his neck. Servants talk too much, he snapped, flicking ash into a tray. Poole was always meddling, poking into things that didn't concern him. If he saw me burning old letters, that was my business, not his. Old letters, Miss Marple said softly. Of course. Though it's odd, isn't it, for a gentleman to burn papers in the garden when a fire indoors would do? Unless, perhaps, they were letters one wouldn't wish seen. Julian's eyes narrowed, but he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple. But I assure you, it was nothing sinister, just clearing out clutter. Poole made a fuss over nothing, as usual. He stood abruptly, tossing his cigarette into the tray. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. As he strode out, Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloguing his defensiveness, the way his hands shook as he lit another cigarette before leaving. He was frightened, she thought, and not merely of scandal. The burned papers, the missing ledger, Poole's letter, all pointed to a secret Julian would kill to protect. But had he? The candle in the library, the butler's sudden death, there was more to uncover, and Miss Marple's instincts told her the truth lay close. She returned to the garden, her eyes scanning the rose bushes once more. The manor loomed behind her, its windows like eyes keeping watch. She thought of her village, where a careless word at the butcher's could unravel a family's secrets. Here, the garden was her butcher's shop, its earth and ashes whispering of Julian's guilt. She would need to speak to Dr. Mortimer next, for his nervous demeanor at the soirée and his quick verdict on Poole's death raised questions of their own. As she walked back to the manor, the wind carried the scent of roses, and Miss Marple felt the weight of truth drawing nearer, as inevitable as the fading autumn light. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Doubt. The following morning, a light drizzle veiled Ashford Green, softening the outlines of Hallowell Manor's stone facade. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the damp, set out for the village, her umbrella a practical shield against the weather, and her thoughts a sharp probe into the mystery of Reginald Poole's death. The charred paper, the undelivered letter, and Julian Hallowell's defensive agitation had woven a troubling pattern, but the doctor's role nagged at her. Dr. Mortimer's hasty declaration of a heart attack, coupled with his nervous demeanor at the soirée, suggested a man with something to hide. Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing through the veneer of respectability, resolved to test his story. The village surgery was a modest building, its waiting room warmed by a coal fire and scented with antiseptic. Dr. Mortimer, a thin man with a perpetually furrowed brow, looked up from his desk as Miss Marple entered, her expression one of mild concern. "Good morning, doctor," she said, settling into a chair with the air of a patient seeking reassurance. "I hope you'll forgive an old woman's fussiness, but I've been feeling a touch out of sorts, nothing serious, just a need for your expert opinion." Dr. Mortimer's smile was strained, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "Of course, Miss Marple. Let's have a look." As he took her pulse, his movements were mechanical, his eyes avoiding hers. Miss Marple, ever adept at steering conversation, let the silence linger before speaking. "Such a tragedy at the manor," she said softly, as if the thought had just occurred. "Poor Mr. Poole, taken so suddenly. You must have been quite shocked, being called to examine him." Dr. Mortimer's hand faltered, the stethoscope trembling slightly. "Yes, very sad," he said, his voice clipped. "A heart attack, as I told Lady Beatrice." not uncommon in a man of his age, under strain. Strain, Miss Marple echoed, her tone gentle but probing. He did seem a man of great responsibility. Though it's curious, isn't it, that he was working by candlelight in the library? The manor has such fine electric lights. The doctor's face paled, his fingers tightening on the stethoscope. I hadn't noticed, he stammered. I was called in haste, you see. My focus was on Poole, not the room. He busied himself with a chart, but his hands betrayed him, shaking as he scribbled a note. Miss Marple's eyes, soft but unyielding, watched him closely. Of course, she said, though I heard you visited him the night before, with a tonic. Was he unwell then? Dr. Mortimer froze, his pen hovering. A tonic, yes, he said, too quickly. Just a mild sedative for his nerves. He'd been overworking, as I said. His voice was tight, and he stood abruptly, as if eager to end the consultation. You seem quite well, Miss Marple. A little rest, perhaps, and you'll be right as rain. She thanked him, her smile serene, but her mind was alight. His evasiveness, the tremor in his hands, the rushed verdict, all pointed to a man concealing more than medical opinion. As she left the surgery, the drizzle had thickened, and she opened her umbrella, her thoughts turning to the tonic. In her village, she had known of medicines used to mask darker deeds, and Poole's sudden death, paired with the candle's odd presence, suggested something sinister. Back at the manor, Miss Marple sought out Clara, finding her in the linen closet, folding sheets with a distracted air. Clara, she said, her voice warm, you mentioned Mr. Poole was frightened the night before he died. Did you see Dr. Mortimer with him, perhaps delivering that tonic? Clara's hands paused, her eyes wide. Yes, miss, I did. The doctor came round after supper, said he was checking on Mr. Poole's health. They spoke in the pantry, private-like, and the doctor gave him a small bottle. Mr. Poole didn't look pleased, but he took it. Did he drink it? Do you know? Miss Marple asked, her tone as casual as if discussing the weather. Clara nodded slowly. I think so, miss. I saw him later, in the hall, holding the bottle and looking. Queer, like he didn't trust it, but he said it was just for his nerves. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. A tonic, a frightened butler, and a candle lit in a room with electric lights. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. She returned to the library, its heavy silence a stark contrast to the manor's bustling preparations. The table where Poole had been found was pristine, but she examined the candlestick again, its silver gleaming in the dim light. Running her fingers along its base, she felt a slight give, a hidden seam. With a gentle twist, the base opened, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a vial, half filled with a colorless powder, odorless but ominous. Her heart quickened, though her face remained calm. The vial, tucked away like a secret, suggested a truth she had suspected. Poole's death was no accident. The tonic, delivered by Dr. Mortimer, could have been laced with poison, its effects masked by the butler's known heart condition. The candle, she realized, might have been lit to obscure the time of death, a clumsy attempt to stage the scene. Miss Marple slipped the vial into her handbag, its weight joining the letter and the charred paper. She thought of her village, where a chemist's error or a whispered grudge could unravel a life. Here, the manor's secrets were deeper, tangled in duty and betrayal. Dr. Mortimer's nervousness, Julian's desperation. The hidden vial all pointed to a conspiracy, but she needed proof to tie them together. As she left the library, the drizzle outside had softened to a mist, and Miss Marple felt the truth drawing closer, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. Chapter 7. The Candle's Truth. The late afternoon light filtered through Hallowell Manor's tall windows, casting a muted glow over the polished floors as Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting untouched in her lap. The vial of powder, concealed in her handbag alongside Poole's letter and the charred scrap of paper, weighed heavily on her mind. The discovery in the candlestick's hidden compartment had confirmed her suspicions. Reginald Poole's death was no mere heart attack. The butler's final hours, marked by fear, a mysterious letter, and a candle lit in defiance of electric lights, pointed to a deliberate act. Miss Marple's village-honed instincts, sharpened by years of unraveling human frailties, urged her to act swiftly, but with the caution of one who knew the truth could slip through careless hands. She rose, her steps soft but purposeful, and sought out Lady Beatrice, who was in the morning room arranging letters for the post. The air was scented with lavender from a vase on the table, but the atmosphere was taut, as if the manor itself sensed the gathering storm. "Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle yet firm, "I must speak with you privately. It concerns Mr. Poole." Lady Beatrice's hand paused over an envelope, her eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Jane, you sound so serious. What is it?" She gestured to a chair, and the two women sat, the door firmly closed against prying ears. Miss Marple drew the letter from her handbag, its worn edges a testament to Poole's hesitation. "I found this in Mr. Poole's room," she said, handing it to her friend. "It was meant for you, but never sent. You should read it." Lady Beatrice's face paled as she scanned the butler's precise script, her lips tightening at the mention of missing funds and Julian's suspected involvement. £500, she murmured, her voice a mix of shock and anger. "And Julian. Oh, Jane, this is dreadful. But surely it doesn't mean—" She stopped, her eyes searching Miss Marple's calm, steady gaze. "There's more," Miss Marple said, producing the vial. "This was hidden in the library candlestick where Poole was found. I suspect it's poison, administered perhaps through the tonic Dr. Mortimer gave him the night before his death. The candle, I believe, was lit to confuse the time of death, to make it seem he died later than he did." Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her throat, her emerald ring glinting. "Poison? Jane, are you saying Reginald was murdered?" Her voice trembled, but her resolve hardened. "We must call the police at once. This cannot stand." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind racing. "I agree, Beatrice. But we must be discreet until the authorities arrive. The guilty party is still among us, and they may act again if alarmed." Within the hour, Inspector Craddock, a familiar figure from Miss Marple's past investigations, arrived from the county police. His brisk manner and keen eyes reassured Lady Beatrice, but it was Miss Marple's quiet presence that guided the inquiry. She presented the letter, the charred paper, and the vial, recounting her findings with the clarity of a village gossip, piecing together a scandal. "The letter suggests Mr. Julian was embezzling funds," she explained. "The burned paper, found in the garden, hints at debts he was desperate to conceal. And the vial, well, I leave that to your analysts, Inspector, but I suspect it will prove significant." Craddock's brow furrowed as he examined the vial. "This is serious, Miss Marple. If it's poison, we're looking at murder." He turned to Lady Beatrice. "I'll need to question your nephew, Dr. Mortimer, and anyone else who might know something. Where's Julian now?" Lady Beatrice, her face drawn, sent for Julian, Dr. Mortimer, and Mrs. Lavinia Gray, whose connection to Julian had not escaped Miss Marple's notice. The interviews took place in the library, its heavy air a fitting backdrop. Julian entered first, his charm replaced by a sullen defiance. "This is absurd," he snapped, when shown the letter. "Poole was an old fool, always meddling. I borrowed a bit of money. Yes, but murder? Preposterous." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the sweat on his brow, the way his eyes flicked to the candlestick. "Borrowing is one thing, Mr. Hallowell," she said mildly, "but burning papers and hiding poison suggest more than a loan." Julian paled, his defiance crumbling, but he held his tongue. Dr. Mortimer was next, his nervous energy palpable as he twisted his hands. Under Craddock's probing, he admitted to prescribing the tonic, but denied tampering with it. "It was just a sedative," he insisted, his voice cracking. Poole was anxious, overworked. I had no reason to harm him. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but piercing. Yet you were quick to call it a heart attack, Doctor, without a thorough examination. And you visited him that night, alone. Why? Dr. Mortimer's face collapsed, and after a long pause, he broke. Julian, he knew something about me, he whispered. A mistake from years ago, a patient I lost through carelessness. He threatened to expose me unless I helped him. He gave me the powder, said it would just make Poole sleep. I didn't know it was poison, I swear. Craddock's eyes narrowed. And you, Mr. Hallowell? What say you to that? Julian's shoulders slumped, his bravado gone. I just wanted him quiet, he muttered. Poole found the missing funds, was going to tell Aunt Beatrice. I couldn't let him ruin me. The debts? They were crushing. Lavinia helped, but it wasn't enough. I slipped the powder into his tonic, lit the candle to make it look like he worked late, and collapsed. I didn't mean for him to die. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her heart ached for the folly of greed. Mrs. Gray, when questioned, admitted to lending Julian money, but denied knowledge of the poison, her sharp features crumpling in distress. The vial was sent for analysis, and within hours, the results confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions. A slow-acting poison, undetectable in small doses, but lethal to a man with Poole's weak heart. As Julian and Dr. Mortimer were taken into custody, the manor seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare. Miss Marple stood by the library window, watching the rain-soaked garden, her thoughts drifting to her village, where a careless act could unravel a life. The candle's truth had burned brightly, illuminating the darkness of human desperation. Chapter 8. The Manor's Peace. The rain had ceased, leaving Hallowell Manor bathed in the soft, silvery light of an autumn dusk. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading roses. As Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the Manor's drawing-room, her eyes tracing the familiar contours of the room now quieted by the resolution of its secrets. The arrests of Julian Hallowell and Dr. Mortimer had cast a pall over the household, yet there was a sense of release, as if the Manor's ancient stones had exhaled a long-held breath. Lady Beatrice, seated by the fire, her hands clasped tightly, looked older than her years, the weight of betrayal etched into her features. Miss Marple, her knitting bag at her side, approached her friend with the gentle tread of one accustomed to soothing troubled hearts. "Beatrice," she said, settling into a chair, her voice as warm as the fire's glow, "you've borne this with great strength. The manor will recover, as will you." Lady Beatrice's eyes, red-rimmed but resolute, met hers. "Jane, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved Hallowell's honor, exposed the truth about poor Reginald, but at such a cost. Julian, my own nephew, and Dr. Mortimer, whom I trusted. It's almost too much to bear." She paused, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "How did you know, Jane? How did you see what we all missed?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression as serene as a village pond. "It's nothing remarkable, my dear. In my village, people are much the same, driven by fear, greed, or duty. Mr. Poole's death was too convenient, the candle too out of place. A man of his habits wouldn't light it without reason, and the letter, the burned papers, the vial, they all told a story of desperation. Julian's charm hid a weak heart, and Dr. Mortimer's guilt made him pliable. It's always the small things, Beatrice, that reveal the truth." Lady Beatrice shook her head, a faint smile breaking through her sorrow. "You make it sound so simple, Jane, but without you, we'd have buried Reginald as a heart attack and never known. I shudder to think what else Julian might have done." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she resumed her knitting, a scarf taking shape in her hands. "People underestimate the quiet ones," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Butlers, housemaids, old women with their knitting, they see everything. Clara's whispers, Mrs. Baxter's gossip, Thomas's unease, they were the threads I followed. And the candle, of course. It burned for a reason, to hide the time of death, but it only drew attention to the crime. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Outside, the garden lay still, the rose bushes bearing silent witness to the secrets they had guarded. Miss Marple thought of her own village, where a misplaced word or a furtive glance could unravel a life. Here, in Ashford Green, the manor's grandeur had cloaked a similar truth, but her patient observation had stripped it bare. Lady Beatrice rose, her posture straighter now. "I'll ensure Reginald's memory is honored," she said. "A proper service, and perhaps a small fund for the staff in his name. He was loyal to a fault, wasn't he?" "He was," Miss Marple agreed. Duty was his candle, and it burned brightly to the end. As she prepared to leave Hallowell Manor, Miss Marple packed her knitting, the letter and vial now in Inspector Craddock's hands. The train to her village awaited, but she lingered a moment on the manor's steps, the evening air cool against her face. The case was closed, yet her heart carried a familiar ache for the frailties of those she had judged. Julian's greed, Dr. Mortimer's cowardice, even Lavinia Gray's complicity in lending money. They were not monsters, but people undone by their own choices. She thought of Poole, his meticulous ledgers and steadfast duty, a man who had died for the truth he uncovered. The candle's flame had flickered out, but its light had pierced the darkness, revealing the manor's hidden heart. As Miss Marple stepped into the waiting car, the dusk deepened, and she reflected on the universal truths she had learned in her quiet village, that secrets, like candles, burn brightest before they fade, and that justice, though costly, restores the peace.